Regine. I'm joined in the studio by the Douglas East MHK Chris Robertshaw. Good morning to you, Mr. Robertshaw. Strange way for the public to feel, really, and see real scrutiny will be applied. Because it could be said, I suppose, that the current Council of Ministers appear to be marking their own homework, if you like.
Well, this episode takes me back quite a number of years, James, when I had not long been in the Council of Ministers as a fairly new MHK, and I said to my then Council of Minister colleagues, you do know this system is dysfunctional. And they sort of looked at me as if I'd come up through a crack in the pavement, and the attitude was, well, the question was, why? And I said, because decisions arrive at this table, as it were, preformed and decided, and it simply requires the stamp of approval of the Council of Ministers. And in my view, it was the wrong way to go about decision-making processes, and that was the beginning for me of the process of appreciating and understanding that structurally government is not fit for purpose.
Well, just tell me, were you still a minister when discussions about this first arose? Because I think you left early 2015, something like that.
Yes, I left because my view was that the way we were operating was inadequate. It had complications all over the place that resulted in bad decision making, and here we have an example. It's not on its own. And I do hope that at the end of all this, we don't end up making the current Minister of DED the scapegoat. Because if we do that, James, we've completely missed the point.
OK, but should those responsible survive? Because this is...
Well, who's responsible, James?
Well, the Council of Ministers report, or I should say the report submitted to the Council of Ministers, clearly points the finger at the Minister and the former Chief Executive, Chris Corlett, who left his post last Christmas.
It also says something else, which is very important, and I think I need to focus on that, and that is that the collaborative capacity across government is inadequate, number one, and number two, in terms of strategic big-ticket thinking, we have inadequate resource, and that's something I absolutely agree with, and that's what we should be concentrating on. Not going round finding a big stick and finding who the hell to beat up, because it's not the way to do it.
So has no one got to take responsibility for this?
Yeah, we all have. All of us got to take responsibility and face up to the fact that we keep getting evidence thrown at us that our structure, our construct is inappropriate.
Just let me go back to the report then, because it says the Council of Ministers work in identifying and resolving cross-governmental issues is a complete failure. So is this a classic example of what you've called for a few years now silo thinking?
Yes, and last month didn't we have a report from the Scottish Inspectorate on Children's Services? Didn't it conclude with exactly the same thing? And then we've got another report that David Cretney's bringing forward as chair of the Social Affairs Policy Review Committee on the personal capability assessment system. And what does he say in his conclusions? Actually, we need better cross-departmental work. So how many times have we got to be told the same thing from so many different sources that we need to change the way we work?
Just let me go back. Were you still in the Council of Ministers when this first was discussed?
Yes, I was.
Right. I mean, did the DED at that time ever consider increased costs that this would prove to be in other departments?
Ask me that question.
Sorry,
again.
that wasn't probably very well phrased. Did the Department of Economic Development, when this first arose, ever consider appointing a promoter would lead to increased costs in other departments?
The evidence we had at the time was that there was satisfactory discussions had taken place, but historically that proved not to be the case, and other departments only became thoroughly conscious and aware of it when it, as it were, came back into their area of interest. And why would you blame DED for that when in fact the structure of government itself in the first place should have dealt with that at a level prior to it arriving at the Council of Ministers?
So without wishing to look for a scapegoat, it's the system that's at fault, you believe, not an individual or three?
Absolutely. If we just make scapegoats out of this current issue, then we have failed miserably to face up to the true issue. Now, the current administration has the attitude, no, we are working together more collaboratively. I believe that's the case. But what they're actually doing as a group of people is they're swimming against the tide, and the tide that they're constantly swimming against is one that we lack strategic resource in the centre. That is absolutely the case. We also have problems with regards to lines of responsibility because they remain absolutely as they were, which is departmental completely. And finally, our financial structure is still one that attributes funding to the silo system. So the ministers can do their best, but they are swimming against the tide, and it's about time we started to change that.
Just let me ask you finally, has the negative and confused publicity here, has it actually damaged the government's image, or does it actually deserve credit for abandoning this, discontinuing the process in the nick of time? Because it's easy to forget, no contract was ever signed.
Well, it was right to abandon it. I'm sure that's the case. But I'm sure the public feel uncomfortable, discomfort over this issue.
But has it caused damage to the island's reputation? I mean, Vision 9's not pursuing legal action, so perhaps it knows that it doesn't really have a case.
It hasn't helped at all, because an external body thinking it's dealing with government, only to then find actually it's dealing with 1/8 of the government, or shall we say a little government within a government, and then becomes bemused that actually it wasn't dealing with the whole organisation. That was the shock for them. And you know, look, just down the road here we have a site, a Lord Street site. I mean, it's a quarter of a century it's been sitting there abandoned and empty. And we haven't done anything about it. Why? Because the responsibility for getting it right sits within a department, and then the responsibility for that then sits with an operational officer, when in fact it is a overarching strategic issue. It's just another example where we have failed to deliver because we constantly want to think and act in boxes. You've got to separate the operational side of government from the strategic. You get the operational side to feed up to the strategic. You don't rely upon the operational side to bring the strategic decisions forward and then just rubber stamp them, as was the attempt to do so with Vision 9.